So A-level maths and physics videos that I did previously seem to be pretty helpful, so I thought I'd do the same for biology as well. So again, without further ado, let's just get straight into it. So what will you study in A-level biology? Well, the good thing is it's very similar to physics in the sense that the actual papers themselves have set topics that you're going to be kind of tested on, which means you have a very structured layout and you can revise pretty easily for each paper specifically. Between the exam boards, there's a huge overlap between the content. However, there are some differences that I'm going to go through right now for you. So let's start off with AQA. With AQA, you have biological molecules, cells, organisms exchange substances with their environment, and genetic information, which are all in paper 1. In paper 2, you have energy transfers in and between organisms, organisms' response to changes in internal and external environments, genetics, and control of gene expression. And then lastly, you have a paper 3, which covers all topics, right? So it's very similar to the physics paper 3, covers all the topics, but it tests you on practical techniques, analysing experimental data, and a 25-mark question, which is an essay question, which is quite interesting, based on one of 2 questions. So it's kind of similar to English language in that sense. You're given 2 options, you have to write for one of them, and they're a 25-mark essay. If you do OCR, you have the exact same topics as AQA, however, they go into a bit more detail and with a few additional subtopics. So for example, you have hormonal control, kidney functions and malfunctions, food production, environmental management, to name a few. OCR is even weirder in terms of the papers. So with paper 1, you have multiple choice questions and the usual types of questions that you have in GCSE science, you know, the 5 or 6 markers, the multiple parts, all that normal stuff. Paper 2, however, has a 25-mark question, just like AQA does. However, it's based on an article that you get given in advance of the exam, which is kind of interesting, right? And you have to basically write an essay-based answer on that question itself. Paper 3 then tests your practical skills exactly like AQA and your normal kind of understanding and applying it to unique situations. However, this is where the weirdness starts. I mean, other than the article I mentioned earlier, you also have a component 4. Now, if you notice, I'm not saying paper 4 because it's not an exam paper. Instead, it's an experimental based component that you'll be tested on. So you'll have to do some kind of investigation in a classroom or by yourself, however your school does it, with invigilators potentially walking around or your teachers invigilating, and you'll have to do you have to get the equipment all yourself, set up all the equipment yourself, do the experiment by yourself, get your data and results by yourself, find if there's any anomalies, redo parts if you have to, and you're tested on if your results are accurate. So the exam board will do their own experiment, get answers and see if yours are accurate, comparable to theirs. Then they'll test your understanding and your analysis of it. So this is quite a tricky component that a lot of people struggle with. And it used to be, it's also in like physics and chemistry as well, sometimes, depending on your exam board. But AQA does not have this component, which means if you are doing this externally, I would thoroughly recommend to stick with AQA, because doing the experiments under exam conditions, so the component 4s for Edexcel and OCR, is incredibly expensive. Some of these places charge £350+ just to do component 4. Okay, so just be careful with that. Now for Edexcel. Now, if you have a choice, I would just avoid Edexcel. It is widely considered by most teachers to be the hardest exam board for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you actually have 6 exam papers. Yeah, I know, right? That's pretty tough. There are 6 units in Edexcel biology, and you have a paper for each unit. Now, you might think that's actually pretty good, because that means there's a smaller amount of stuff to study for each unit, right? And I would understand your reasoning, but sometimes 6 exam papers, that is incredible. That is a huge quantity. I mean, that's twice as much as you have in maths, right? But the actual content itself, in terms of what they ask you in the exam, is trickier because they don't just ask you simple questions like, write down this process, what happens if this? Instead, it's far more based on the application of knowledge. So they'll stick you in a situation that you know nothing about. Maybe an organ system you haven't studied. And they'll say, you know, using your knowledge of diffusion or active transport, how does this work? What is the effect of this? How does this disease affect someone's ability to do respiration? Right? Could be anything like that. It's far more based on application, which means you need a really in-depth understanding, which, if I'm being honest, you might not have the most in-depth understanding by the time you get to your exams. That might come later at university. So again, that can be a bit tricky. Okay, so what are the problems with A-level biology? Well, again, it depends on the exam board that you do. In my humble opinion, AQA is probably the best exam board to choose. And the reason why I'm saying, and again, this is kind of based on opinion, but also low-key kind of facts. 1, you only have 3 papers. There's no experimental component. 2, all of the papers are clearly labelled with what you need to know. Okay, so it's very simple to revise. With OCR, you have an article you have to write about, which is kind of weird. You have to apply your knowledge, which is kind of weird. You have an experimental component, which is kind of weird. With Edexcel, the whole thing's weird. AQA, in my opinion, is the most straightforward. So again, if you have a choice of exam board, which I understand that most of you don't have a choice of exam board, if you do though, go for AQA. Or if you want, go to a school that does AQA, if you want to be kind of that kind of dramatic. AQA by far is quite easy in comparison to the other ones. But well, I mean by easy, I mean it's less weird. With weirdness, you have a sense of randomness in your exam, which you really don't want. You want to know what kind of questions they can ask you. You want to know what kind of things can come up. With Edexcel, who knows? Who knows what's going to come up, right? There's an infinite number of things they can ask you about. They can ask you about any animal on the planet and rely on you applying your knowledge. OCR, again, the experiments, you have to rely on your school having decent equipment. When I did physics, I had to do experimental practicals as well. They didn't have good equipment and it panicked the hell out of me. I didn't even check what grade I got on the practical thing because I just accepted my fate at that point. You have to also rely on the experiment being good in and of itself. It's a random experiment you find out on the day. You know, that's harsh. So yeah, in my opinion, AQA definitely the best. So what do I recommend? Well, again, in terms of videos that I'm doing or anything like that, I'm not really planning on doing A-level biology or chemistry videos. However, that may change depending on various things. So here's my thorough recommendation. With biology, there's very few calculations. There are a couple. You might have to calculate an average, you might have to calculate a magnification, but they're very basic and you guys are going to be completely fine with doing those. The calculations, easy, right? Like grade 4 maths level stuff. Okay, shouldn't be too bad. However, there is a ton of content that you have to memorize and understand. There are so many physical processes you need to know. Transcription, translation, how the heart pumps blood around the body, etc. There's a million more. How messages move across neurons. You need to know all of these. And that's a lot of content to remember. But the best thing to do it is memorize it bit by bit. If you're going to wait until 2 months before the exam and try and memorize the whole year or 2 years worth of content, you're going to have a bad time. Okay, that's not going to work for you. You need to make sure you're memorizing it as you go along. If you learn about kidneys in this week, by the end of the week, you need to memorize all the stuff about kidneys. Also, you need to work on actually understanding it. Now again, understanding in biology, it's mainly memory, right? But you do need to actually understand what's going on because they may ask you to apply the knowledge slightly. Okay, so understand why certain things are happening, why do certain bonds have to be broken, etc. So, here's what you need to do in terms of your work. Here's my kind of foolproof plan. I want to point out A-level biology and to a lesser extent chemistry. It's a lot of work. So here's what you want to do. You're not only going to keep up with the work, you're also going to rewrite notes after every single lesson. So or maybe let's say every week. Let's say you spend a whole week on the heart. By the end of the week, you want detailed, actual exam-ready notes done. The reason for this is, again, if you wait until A2 to start making notes, you are going to have to spend 100+ hours making notes. Doing that over the course of 2 years, that's not bad doing 200 hours worth of notes. Because you do an hour a week or something like that, right? I mean, that only gives you, 104 hours, but whatever. A couple hours a week. However, if you wait until 2 months before, you have to do 200 hours worth of notes in, 60 days? Good luck. That's going to take a hell of a long time, especially with all the other subjects you have to do. So keep up and write your detailed exam-ready notes. Now, this can be in a separate notebook. It can be ideally on some kind of tablet. I used to kind of hate on tablets, but now I love them. So you can keep them all organized and everything. Put them in folders, or again, if you're on a tablet, you can keep it all organized. And what you also want to do is find all the relevant exam questions, put them in your notes with model answers. This is what I did for university, and this is what I did for actually my A-levels as well. I did A-level biology and A-level physics, and it just makes you indestructible. You just know every 6-mark question, every 1, 2, 3, 4-mark question as well, and 5-mark question. That can come up on every single topic. So when anyone asks me, watch this process, and I was like, is that the 6-mark version or the 4-mark version? 6-mark version, okay, it's these 6 steps, done, easy. You just have it all catalogued in your brain, and if it's organized, your brain remembers it more easily. Okay, it's something that I thoroughly recommend. If you keep up, you'll only have to do 2 hours of notes a week as opposed to 100 hours of notes in a month. It's way easier. It's less stressful for you. And again, look up the exam questions, find the exact model answers, and write those in your notes as well, and understand them. And yeah, again, in terms of the organisation as well, if you're really adamant on using paper, just be warned that you're going to have hundreds of sheets of paper by the end of A-levels. I would say maybe 500 sheets of paper. So if I said to you, okay, could you find your A-level biology notes on the heart, and it takes you an hour to find them, or maybe you don't find them at all, what are you going to do then? Again, I had massive issues with organisation when I was in AS especially, because I didn't keep things organised. So either use a tablet, or every single day once you're done with your detailed notes, tear them out and put them in a folder nicely labelled and titled, and even dated if you want. Okay, just to keep it all kind of clear cut. But on the bright side, with A-level biology, it's really easy to study. If you make these detailed notes, it will be the easiest A-level in the world if you keep up with it. Again, it's 2 hours of extra work every single week, so I get it, that's kind of a lot on top of everything else you have to do, but if you do it, you will thank yourself by the end of AS and A2 as well. That's what we have for today. There isn't that much to talk about with A-level biology. There are some weird aspects to it, but mainly make those notes, keep yourself organised, and you'll have a really good time with it.